in economic terms. So that's the nature of it. And it's not that those kind of values aren't important, because they certainly are. But they're different from social values. Now, social values are instrumental in that there's an expectation of getting something in return. It's something that's personal, but it's something in return. In other words, it's not as precise or quantifiable as economic value, because you don't know exactly what you're going to get, and you don't know when you're going to get it back. But if you do something for a social reason, there is that expectation. In other words, if you want to have a friend, you have to be a friend, which means there's reciprocity involved in it. I never say that word, but there's something reciprocal involved in that particular relationship. But what makes social value different is it's inherently personal. It's associated with a relationship between two particular individuals. It can't be traded. You know, you may think you can, but you can't trade spouses. I mean, you might get another one, but you can't trade one to somebody else. You can't trade real friends. I mean, that friendship is unique. That relationship is unique. And unlike economic relationships that can produce something of economic value, when the relationship's end, it's gone. There's nothing left that you can sell to anybody else. All you have is a few memories, and just hopefully they're good rather than bitter. But that's all there is left. There's nothing of value that's left out of that relationship. So it's instrumental, but it's purely personal. Now, a social relationship is also individual. You can't realize social value after you're dead either. But the important thing about social values is that they evolve into a sense of common good. Because you begin to realize that those personal relationships with your friends and your family apply to people in the broader community of which you're a part. Talk about being a part of a community. You gain a sense of connectedness to the community as a whole. And beyond that, a sense of connectedness and well-being with the broader aspects of society, and that's the process by which social values emerge into ethical values. You see, ethical values are not individual. What's right for one is right for another. What's right for one is right for the common good as well. So those things you learn out of personal relationships, they emerge and they grow to those kinds of relationships need to be respected within communities and within societies as a whole. You see, ethical relationships are impersonal. It doesn't matter what's personal. What's right for one is right for another. What's right for one and another is right for everybody, including those people of future generations. Why should we discriminate against people of future generations? Why shouldn't we treat them as we would treat our friends and our neighbors? That's an ethical value. So it's impersonal. And it's not instrumental. There's no expectation of anything in return, at least not in this lifetime. You simply do it because you know in your heart that it's the right and the good thing to do. And the reward comes to you immediately because of how you feel about who you are and what you're able to do and the life that you're able to live. And it's these ethical values that evolve from social values that are absolutely essential for sustainability, because sustainability says that we should treat those people of future generations as we would have them treat us, that we should meet our needs, but meet our needs in a way that does not diminish opportunities for those people of the future, simply because it's right and good, even though there's no economic incentive to do it. Now, how is that relevant to sustainability and organic farming and so on? I would argue the current emphasis on what we're doing, even under the organic standards, and even what we're doing in many cooperative relationships where we're trying to get together so that we can gain economic efficiencies, is that we're focusing on those social and ethical values that also have economic values. And there are certain kind of values, certain kind of relationships, certainly. There's economic value to positive social relationships. It's easier to do business with people that you get along with and people that you're friendly with and so on of that nature. That's what economists call transactions cost. You reduce the transactions cost. So there's economic value there. There's also economic value today because there is a broader kind of ethical value within society, an ethic that has to do with ethics and sustainability. So there's all kinds of people that are in corporations that have green programs, sustainability programs, because there's people that will pay premium prices for those products. So you can do well financially by doing good. But if you simply focus on that, then you're leaving out all of those purely personal relationships and those ethical relationships that's essential to make the long-run investments for sustainability. Because if you're simply focusing on these individual, impersonal, instrumental relationships, then it's always cheaper and more profitable to extract and exploit than it is to regenerate and renew for the benefit of someone else of some future generation. And that's where we're headed today. I would argue that the only sustainable alternative to vertical competition and vertical integration, as I've talked about, is vertical cooperation. Vertical cooperation. Cooperation not just among producers or not just among consumers, but cooperation among the farmers and the processors and the retailers and the consumer. That whole vertical system involved in a cooperative relationship rather than a competitive relationship and rather than an exploitive relationship. A relationship where everybody's committed to trying to do things and to put together an organization that's mutually beneficial. That you have coordination through cooperation and through coming together and collaborating. So it's the people within that whole system that decide what's to be produced and how it's to be produced and what it's going to cost. And it's the people within the whole system negotiating so that everybody in that system gets a fair share of the profit. And as they were talking about in the session today, with a particular group of consumers, it has to be products that they can afford, that they have access to, and then the system has to adjust in such a way that you can produce products with integrity. And it may not be every producer that can participate in the system that puts the products into the lowest income neighborhoods, but every producer doesn't need to participate in that system. There may be others that can participate in the premium sort of systems where you have the affluent that want particular things. But it's each one of those systems going all the way from the consumer, all the way back to the farmer, where you're getting together and you're saying, we're going to share the benefits. It's going to work for all of us. And we're going to continue to negotiate, and we're going to continue to collaborate until we find a system that works and a system that we can sustain over the long run. I would argue that a cooperative relationship that's based solely or primarily on economic value eventually will succumb to the individual self-interest of the instrumental, impersonal relationships. There will always be a situation where a member of that cooperative, it will be beneficial to them to break away from it and go somewhere else. There will always be an opportunity to get a higher price from somewhere else if you're a seller, to buy something at a cheaper price if you're a buyer. And if you don't have a personal commitment, an ethical commitment, a shared set of social values and ethical values, when people within the cooperative system, eventually it will fall apart through dissension. I tell people, either form cooperative relationships with your friends or make friends out of the people that you form cooperative relationships with. It's about relationships. This concept of vertical integration or vertical cooperation I've talked about underlies the whole sustainability movement. Whether we're talking about organic or biodynamic or ecological, the practical farmers, innovative farmers, all people all around the country. When you go and you talk to people that are in this movement, it's not just about making money for themselves. This is not just about a market. It's about producing things in ways that are good for the community, that are good for the society. It's about the farmers in those situations taking on the responsibility of doing things that are mutually beneficial, even with people that they're not relating with directly. I don't know of any current examples of the vertical cooperative systems that I'm talking about here that meet all of the conditions that I've talked about in terms of sustainability, but there's certainly lots of people that are moving in that direction. I can sort of give you a model if you want to put together an organization like that, because there's a group out in California, Larry E's heading it up out there, called the Food Commons Project. Kind of evolved out of the Agriculture of the Middle Project to the Leopold Center. He's had people working out there, and they put together the model. It's on the internet, but they've got what they call kind of a financial hub and then a distribution hub in the production sector. And they've had some pretty big players in the food system that have been involved in that. But you can go to your website and you can see the practical applications I'm talking about, the things here. It's a principle-based organization rather than a rule-based organization they're talking about. And when you read through the core principles that they're pursuing and they're committed to in here, it talks about principles of fairness within the system, a fair distribution of the benefit. It talks about decentralization so that you're not centralizing power and dictating it. Devolution to the lowest level, subsidiarity. Talks about full transparency, where everybody in the system shares what it's cost them to produce, so you can sit down and negotiate and say, look, this is what it's going to take to produce food this way. This is what it takes to process it. This is what it takes to distribute it. Now, how can we put together a system that will work for all of us, including the consumers on the other end of the system? It talks about stewardship of the land. It talks about a sense of ethics, responsibility among people within the organization. And certainly it talks about the economic principles, but this is an organization that's committed to this full constellation of organic principles, including the social and the ecological and the ethical. And they're moving ahead. I just heard from Larry saying they're going into Fresno, California. He thinks it's going to be the first area out there. If you haven't visited Fresno, that'll be a challenge, because I've been there. I spoke at the organic conference. It's out in the middle of industrial agriculture. Now I realize when you're scaling up, it's going to be necessary. If we're going to create this new food system I'm talking about, we're going to have to do it on a larger scale. We'll still have the farmers markets and the CSAs, but we're going to have higher volume markets, and you need to put those together, and we need to scale up. But if that vertical cooperative is going to be sustainable, you cannot compromise the ecological and social integrity for the sake of economic efficiency. Have to balance those principles as you move forward in order to maintain the integrity. And it must involve the whole food chain. The simplest example of what I'm talking about here in terms of vertical cooperation is the CSA. It's a very simple kind of process, but the customers get together with the farmers, and it's a very short kind of chain. But that's what we're talking about here. Anywhere you have a production cooperative or a processing cooperative that intersects with the mainstream industrial food system, you're tapping into a system where somebody has the power to extract all of the profitability out and to force you back into a situation where you have to exploit the land and exploit your community in order to survive economically. We have to integrate all of the way from the customer back to the land. And I would argue that organizations such as Organic Valley are feeling the pressure today. People in the food system have far more market power than they do, and as is every other cooperative element that's out there today. It must involve the food chain to avoid domination. It's easier to establish these vertical cooperatives at the local level, and I think that's why the local food system is just booming, the local food movement. I think people are losing confidence in the industrial food system and even the industrial organic, and they're saying, I want to go back and get my food from someone I know and someone I trust and someone I can have a relationship with. But the important part about the local food system is not just the freshness or flavor. I agree that's important. The most important part is it stresses the importance of developing those relationships. Because it's easier to develop those relationships when you see people face to face on a regular basis and so on. But that doesn't limit it. You can develop meaningful relationships across distance with an occasional face-to-face contact with a person even in another country. But you have to share those same social and ethical values. But the commitment to stewardship, the ethic of stewardship, the ethic of community, of taking care of each other and taking care of the earth is widespread. There's people all around the globe that share that. It's a matter of making the contact and building the relationship, and we can recreate the whole global food system based on ecological, social, and economic integrity. A global food system with its foundation in relationships. This is going to be a tremendous challenge to many farmers, particularly conventional farmers that have been out here for a long time. Because, you know, the sad matter of the fact of the matter is that most of us old men have been grown in a culture that doesn't value relationships. We're supposed to be independent, aggressive, assertive. That's the way we're raised. That's the way I was raised. And a lot of people are that way today. One reason I think you look around this audience and you see far more females here than you'd see in a conventional agriculture audience anyway, is that young women are in many cases are brought up to think relationships are important. You have to learn to relate to other people. It's these old men that are going to treat you mean, and so you have to get together and band together and figure out how you're going to survive. So that's kind of in the culture. So relationships aren't easy. You know, I was that way. I was 50 years old before I woke up to the fact that relationships were really important. Had a few that had fallen apart by that time that I wasn't able to fix. But anyway, I learned a valuable lesson. So I know it's not easy, particularly when you start in middle age, trying to evaluate and figure out how it is that you make a relationship and keep a relationships and things of that nature. But the great message is for all of these guys that don't know how to make relationships or don't know how to build relationships, is the keys or the principles of positive human relationships are fairly simple and straightforward. The problem is, particularly in organics, you know, most of the people that are in organics today know a lot about production. We've done research, you share a lot of values. Most of the workshops here about how you produce or the technicalities of value market. But we've done very little research or very little education on how you create, make, and maintain relationships, or the importance of relationship. We really need to bring that in to our educational programs and our research programs. But as I say, the fundamental principles are really pretty simple. There's an organization called the Institute for Global Ethics. You can go on the internet again. The internet's a wonderful thing. You can look them up. But it's an organization that have done interviews and focus groups and surveys and things like this all over the world. And they've asked people within the community, all the income, age levels, religions, everything else. They said, what are the most important kind of core ethical values? Remember, ethical values evolve out of social values. What are the most important ethical values within your communities? And of course, they find out all different kinds of answers because different cultures have different social values, different nationalities and different religions and things of that nature. But they've also found that there's a core of, they've identified as 5 core values that appear in virtually all these communities of people all over the world, all different nationalities, races, and so on. And those core values are honesty, fairness, responsibility, respect, and compassion. Who wants to disagree with any of those? Who wants to make an argument that you can treat people dishonest, you can be dishonest, unfair, irresponsible, disrespectful, uncaring, and still maintain a relationship? You want to argue that? Well, if you put those together, you can have fundamental principles. And I would argue these principles are essential to relationships, essential to cooperation. If you put together honesty and fairness, responsibility, you have something called trust. Trust is based on being truthful, being straightforward, accepting your share of the responsibility, even more if necessary, fulfilling your commitments. What we need for sustainable relationships are relationships that are based on trust. They're fair, they're honest, they're responsible, rather than contracts, which we argue in courts and can be broken and so on. This is the key to a sustainable relationship. Trust is important, trust is necessary, but it's not sufficient. We all make mistakes from time to time. There's times when we need mercy much more than we need justice. Relationships that are sustainable have to be based on kindness. Kindness starts with the idea of empathy. We have to be able to put ourselves in another person's position and treat that other person as we would have them treat them treat us if we were in their position and they were in ours. It's reflection of the golden rule. We have to respect other people's differences as we hope that they will respect ours. We have to have confidence in ourselves so that we can respect others and expect them to give us. We have to be willing to forgive people when we make mistakes, because we all make mistakes from time to time and we all need to be forgiven. And a relationship without forgiveness is a fragile relationship that will soon be broken. It takes trust and it takes kindness, but there's another principle of lasting, sustainable relationships, and that's courage. It's good to be kind-hearted and be trustworthy, but you have to have courage to take the risks that are associated with trusting someone else and being kind to someone else that may betray you and may hurt you. You have to be willing to step up and act in the way that you feel in your heart is right and good. You have to have the courage to be kind and to be trusting. You have to have self-confidence, persistence, and stick with it. Courage is not just a matter of bravery, of going out and doing something or going at it alone. It's a matter of moral courage when you put it together. And that's what it takes to sustain relationships. And I would argue that we could improve the relationships and improve the quality of our life in our society dramatically if we all simply practiced in our imperfect way the desire to develop trusting relationships of kindness with other people. And all of those are essential because it's the whole of it. The cooperative relationships I'm talking about have some advantages when you talk about independent farmers, because there's many people that do farm because of the independence, and I respect that, and the privacy and the solitude of being out. There's many people that are simply not people. I think you can improve on that on time as I did, but if you join in a collaborative or a cooperative relationship with other people, then some people can take the lead within the organization that already has those skills to build relationships and to help maintain the relationship, so that it takes some of the burden that you would have if you were trying to do it all by yourself. But you need to recognize that you still need to be involved. You still need to have a meaningful connection to the other people within your collaborative or your cooperative or alliance relationship. You need to relate to the other farmers that you're with if you're a farmer. And you need to be willing to connect with the consumers from now and then, because what's driving the local sustainable food movement in large part is a desire on the part of so many customers, so many consumers, to reconnect with the land. There's something within all of us. There's this need to be connected to the earth from which we come and to which we go back. And somehow we get that commitment through the food system when we're interacting with farmers and interacting with the people that are in direct contact with the land. And if you leave that out of the collaborative relationship or the cooperative relationship, you're not going to sustain it. It'll lack that social and ethical integrity that comes from that sense of connectedness. We've got to be willing to reach out to other people. So when I talk about vertical cooperation and social and ethical relationships, you say, what's that old fool doing? You're so naive and idealistic and out of touch with reality. You know, how does this square with economic reality? He says he's an economist. What's he talking about? Well, let me give you some quotes from the most respected, I would argue, the most influential economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes. All economists are Keynesians, whether they admit it or not. The free market people are the people that want to cut taxes, the people who want to increase government spending. If they're saying that's going to increase jobs, they're a Keynesian economist. The most influential economist. What did John Maynard Keynes say? He wrote a series of essays called Essays in Persuasion back in the 1920s, in which Keynes said, that he thought that within 100 years, the economic problem would be solved, or very nearly so. You see, Keynes understood that the economic problem was just meeting our individual, impersonal, instrumental needs. The way we get enough food, clothing, shelter, transportation, health care, whatever, to meet our basic needs. That's what the economy was about. That's what real economists know that the economy is about. And Keynes said that problem would be solved within 100 years. And then he said we could use our freedom from pressing economic cares to focus on the permanent problem, which was to learn to live wisely, agreeably, and well. That's what Keynes says about where we are today. Keynes was right. In fact, Keynes was pessimistic. There is a mountain of evidence that suggests that the economic problem in this country and in most of the so-called developed world was solved 40 or 50 years ago. That we had enough. That we had enough to meet our basic economic needs at that time. There's a review, again, that references in the paper, but over 150 studies that people have done on happiness and satisfaction in countries all over the world. And what they found out is as a country is developing economically, there is tremendous increase in well-being and happiness up to a certain point while they're meeting their economic needs. That's very important. But in the range of about $10,000 to $15,000 per capita GDP, or per capita income, roughly, that beyond that point, There is no relationship between increased happiness, overall well-being, quality of life, and wealth. There are rich countries where people are happy. There are poor countries where people are happy. There are rich countries where people are unhappy. We happen to be one of the richest and one of the least happy countries in the world. We are no happier, maybe even less so, than we were in the 1950s. The economic problem had been solved now. In fact, there's a British cabinet study that was done in 2003. And they did a study where they went to all the developed world, and they concluded there had been no increase in overall well-being of people in the developed world since the 1950s. There's a new book out called The Spirit Level that points out the very same thing. There's a book out called Prosperity with Growth with a whole mound of data in it. It's everywhere out here. You know, the research is simply confirming our common sense. What we all know is that once our basic needs are met, once we have enough food, clothing, shelter to meet our basic needs, that the quality of our life or the increase in our quality of life, it's about relationships, whether we're getting along with our family, whether we're friends, where we have a sense of belonging within the community. That's what determines whether we're happy or not. That's what makes us more happy or more unhappy. It's the quality of those relationships, and beyond that, it's the sense of purpose and meaning in life. It's whether we feel like we're doing something worthwhile, where we're making a positive contribution. It's a sense of purpose and meaning that gives us a sense of what's right and what's wrong. Because if there's no purpose in life, there's nothing right or nothing wrong, because it doesn't make any difference what you do. And it's that sense of purpose that makes you happy, that makes you satisfied, that gives you that contentment in the core of your being. It's just common sense. Why don't we behave like we know we ought to really enhance our quality of life? And you know the best part of that? The essential economic, social, and ethical or ecological dimensions of happiness and well-being are the same essential dimensions, economic, social, ecological, of sustainability. Sustainability is simply about pursuing a life of happiness, of well-being, of purpose, of relationships. We need to move beyond looking at sustainability as a constraint and focus on beyond sustainability and realize that it's not a sacrifice to care for other people because it makes our life better today, right now. It's not a sacrifice to care for the earth and care about the future of humanity because it's the right and good thing to do, and we realize that value in our own heart and soul right now when we make that decision. That's what it's about. Moving beyond sustainability. We've got enough. There's nobody in this room that doesn't have more than enough, including me. Our lives would be shattered if we shared with those people of the world that don't have enough, that still need economic development. We would feel better. Our country would be better. We would be better individuals. It's time to move beyond sustainability. Learn to live well, have enough economically. Learn to live wisely, care about future generations. Learn to live agreeably. Relate to each other in positive ways, and through positive relationships, move to a new and better world by learning to live wisely, agreeably, and well. Thank you. I didn't mean to take quite that much time, but sometimes I just get wound up. You got a good congregation and you preach a good sermon. I sometimes get accused when I come to conferences like this and say, well, you're preaching to the choir, because I don't really preach, I just say what comes to me. But my response to that is, no, I'm not preaching to the choir, I'm sharing with the disciples, you know. The Bible says the disciples need to get together now and then and share with each other and build each other up through good works and good words, and so it prepares you to go out into the rest of the world and spread the gospel of organic sustainability. So that's what I've done tonight. Have questions? Be glad to answer questions for as long as you want to. So I want to ask them. Comments. You know, I sometimes say what I say is my truth. If your truth's different, that's okay. I've made too many mistakes in my life, get too serious about my truth.
Hi.
Hi.
I was recently assigned one of your papers for my master's program in sustainable food systems, and I had some issues with it, some questions.
All right.
You stated in the paper, I think it was in 2007, you used the word paradigm a lot. Does that help you remember which one it is?
Probably. I went through a paradigm phase at one time.
Yeah. Kuhn does that to people. He really does. So you mentioned that the responsibility for this change is put back on scientists, and it's their responsibility to research so that people can find a way to accomplish the change that you have proposed tonight. Do you still feel that it's the scientists? And we had a symposium yesterday, and there are a lot of scientists doing good research on different alternative methods of agriculture and energy usage. So I think they're doing what you're suggesting, but maybe it's not happening at the rate that you would expect.
No,
whose responsibility is it?
No, I haven't changed my mind on that. I don't think it's just the responsibility of the researchers, but I think public researchers in public institutions have the responsibility to do research on things that are for the public good rather than the private interest. I think what's driving too much of our research today is what's saleable and what you can get support from the private sector, not just in private grants or contracts or things like that, but the private food system that I've talked about, the corporate food system, exerts tremendous political pressure on the government organizations that allocate money to universities and USDA and other places. So I think they respond to that. Now the research that they're doing, there's nothing necessarily wrong with it, except that it doesn't address the broader issues of sustainability that we need to address. The research that's being done today is good research and is useful to people, but it doesn't make that paradigm shift from sort of the reductionist view of the world as a mechanistic sort of system, which comes out of the industrial mindset and the old science, you know, the Newton and Descartes and the science of that era, was the world works like a big sophisticated mechanism. We're going to have to make a change in the mindset to the world as a big living organism, because to be sustainable it has to be self-doing and it has to be regenerative, and it's only living systems that have the capacities of self-renewal and regeneration. And so while the industrial model, the mechanistic system, has been a very efficient means of extracting the usefulness out of nature and extracting the usefulness out of society, and that's what it was designed to do, because we didn't realize the limits. We have to have a change in mindset and start thinking of science in an organismic kind of system. The best example, the reductionist approach, says you can take things apart and understand the essence of the whole by looking at the pieces. Okay, let me apply that to a living system. You dissect me and lay me out here on this stage up here, and then you come up and look at you and you say, well, where's the essence of John Ikerd in all of that? First thing, when you take me apart, you've destroyed the essence of me. You've destroyed my life. The interconnectedness, that continuous interconnected flow of energy and chemicals and matter was the essence of me. And when you take me apart, you lose that. And there's no way that you can understand me as a whole by looking at my parts. You have to understand me as a whole, and then you understand the functioning of the parts. It's a change in thinking that the scientific community has not yet addressed. I still stand by it. I may be wrong, but I still stand by it.
There's some good systems research coming out of U of M. I went to Michigan State, so I don't say that with pride, because there are competitors. But they have some good research available regarding systems thinking. Not that that's going to change the entire system. Also, funding for a lot of Big Ten university or land grant research comes from companies like Cargill. You know, so how's that going to change?
Well, whenever the people demand from the universities, they take them back. I was quoted, and I did actually say it at the Leopold Center at Iowa State University. I made that sermon about people taking their universities back. These are the people's universities. When you go into a Walmart store and you have $10 and I got one, then you get to spend 10 times as much money as I do, because you've got it. That's an economic transaction that's taking place there. But when you go into a voting booth and you've got $1,000 in your pocket and I got one, we still get one vote. Now, going to your land-grant university is like going into a voting booth. That's a public institution. You ought to walk in there and say, I have as much right to be here, and you have as much responsibility to respond to my needs as the president of Monsanto or Cargill. And if you're not willing to do that, we're going to take that. I'm going to get a bunch of like-minded people, and we're going to take our university back. The quote that said is that they ought to get together and form a big party, and they ought to go down and form a tractorcade around the dean's office and hang the dean in effigy outside. So and it so happened that the dean had just recently fired the director of the Leopold Center, so I didn't realize that when I said it. I just say what comes to me when I'm up there. But before we leave that, I want to say very quickly, there are people in all of these universities, including some folks here with small farm programs, sustainable. There are people within each of these institutions that are absolutely heroic. They are doing great work in organic and sustainable and local foods in an environment that's absolutely hostile to what they're doing, because I lived in that environment for 10 years and I know what it's like to be there. So I want to give applause to those people that are doing it in spite of the institution.
So you were talking about reprioritizing values, and right now we have an economic system that puts monetary value before social and ecological values. So my question is, how do we prioritize those values when right now the incentive is to make decisions based on money? How do you make that actual transition from an economy based on money to based on values? And in that, what I hear is you're saying that either scientists, as her question was, or the people in general have to start voicing, well, just to use an example, genetically engineered alfalfa was an issue last year at NOFA, and it was talked about hugely, and there was a huge push by NOFA and organizations across the country, and a lot of people were behind that movement, but still, GM alfalfa was approved. So please give me some examples of how an actual, your philosophy, which what I hear is a philosophy, how is it going to be actually applied to a reality?
Okay, to begin with, the change, you can't force it from on high. There can't be some czar move into Washington or whatever that says, okay, we're going to create a sustainable society and we're going to realign the priorities and we're going to put high priority to nature and society and economy. It can't happen from a group of elites or whatever. It has to come from the people. It has to come from you and me and everybody like you and me who says, okay,